The Shepherd's Rod History. Please kneel in prayer before watching this video and claim the promise of John 16:13. The Shepherd's Rod message began with the Lord instructing his servant Micah, and we can find this in Micah 6:9. The Lord's voice crieth unto the city, and the man of wisdom shall see thy name. Hear ye the rod, and who hath appointed it? Shepherd's Rod believers are correctly known as Davidian Seventh-day Adventist. This is in the background is a picture of the original headquarters in Waco, Texas, around the end of 1940s, early 50s. The Rod message began in 1930, and here's a picture of the first book of the Shepherd's Rod. It's volume 1, and it had twofold message. The first was the 144,000 truth, and the second was a call for reformation. So the very first volume was directed at those two topics so that we may be better able to know the Lord's intention of the truth of the 144,000, and also how we can reform as Seventh-day Adventist. Here are 3 pictures of Victor Tasso Houteff. The Lord worked through this man to bring the Shepherd's Rod message to his church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. On the left picture, we see Victor Houteff with his wife, Florence. In the middle picture, we see him in front of his headquarters. In the right, we see a facial picture of him. We don't know the date when that picture was made. It's very interesting to note that the Shepherd's Rod and Mount Carmel Center, the titles came by inspiration. And we quote from Victor Houteff, found in Symbolic Code, Volume 1, number 14, page 5. It might be interesting to Elder G to know that the naming of our camp, Mount Carmel Center, came about in the same way as the naming of our publications, the Shepherd's Rod, for we did not know beforehand that it was in prophecy until after our attention was called to Micah 7:14 and Amos 1:2. So Victor Houteff began publication of the Shepherd's Rod, not aware of Micah 6:9, as well as naming Mount Carmel Center, not aware of Micah 7:14. The spirit of prophecy knew a male prophet, Elijah, would come, and that can be found in Testimony to Ministers, page 475. Let heaven guide. Prophecy must be fulfilled, the Lord says. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day. Somebody is to come in the spirit and power of Elijah, and when he appears, men may say, you are too earnest. You do not interpret the scriptures in the proper way. Let me tell you how to teach your message. Testimonies to Ministers, page 475. Now we want to make a note here that the SDA leaders, Seventh-day Adventist leaders, added an asterisk after the name Elijah in 1962 edition of Testimonies to Ministers. The first two editions, 1923 and 44, did not have the added asterisk information. The General Conference added it to say that Ellen White was talking about herself as the Elijah to come. It was after Victor Houteff died, and the SDA Church was dealing with an underground movement proclaiming that his writings were inspired. Now, why we say underground movement is because this movement had been effectively uh, uh, countered by the leaders uh, since his very first publication in 1930 of the Shepherd's Rod. The leaders did not accept the writings or the 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 purpose of the rod. They countered it because it was something they disagreed with, and yet they could never prove the actual interpretations incorrect. Um, so to quiet the speculation, they published a 1962 edition of the book and added the asterisks telling people to not take her words as they appear. The he was really meant as she, and to see it in a different and foreign viewpoint. So, as we said in the volume 1 Shepherd's Rod, the main purpose was said in the preface of the actual Shepherd's Rod volume 1, and it reads, "It is the intention of this book to reveal the truth of the 144,000 mentioned in Revelation 7, but the chief object of this publication is to bring about a reformation among God's people. The truth herein contained is divided into 7 sections, giving proof from 7 different angles to prevent any doubt or confusion. The subject is made clear by the use of the Bible and the writings given by the Spirit of prophecy. The truth revealed here is of great importance to the church just now because of the foretold danger which God's people are soon to meet. It calls for decided action on the part of the believers to separate themselves from all worldlings and worldliness, to anchor themselves on the solid rock by obedience to all truth known to this denomination. If we must escape the great ruin, the Lord's voice crieth unto the city, and the man of wisdom shall see thy name. Hear ye the rod, and who hath appointed it? Micah 6:9. This is found in Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, in the preface. So the rod literature began. 1930, the Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, the first of many charts, also began. 1932, the Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, began. 1933, Track 1, Pre 11th Hour Extra, the first of 15 tracks, begins, plus many miscellaneous tracks through 1954. In 1934, the symbolic codes begin, first of 46 published by Victor Houteff. In 1935, Mount Carmel Center in Waco, Texas, is established. 1944, The Answer, Volumes 5, came out. There were 5 total. In 1946, the Timely Greetings sermon publications began, and we had a total of 98 produced. Here we see a picture of some of the charts that came from the message. The first one is example of the Old and New Testament church history depicted by one family. And this is a prophecy that was disclosed in the message concerning Hosea 1 and 2. A beautiful story of how the Lord uh, dealt with the church and in the form of a family. Here is the well-known shepherd's rod Daniel 2 chart. This is spread among many believers and given in studies. And it basically shows a picture of the Daniel 2 prophecy. And you'll notice the rock coming from the mountain. This is important because we as Seventh-day Adventists often teach that the rock is coming from heaven. In other words, we're saying that the rock is Jesus. And in fact, if we learn the true interpretation, which is given in the shepherd's rod concerning Daniel 2, we will find out that the rock is indeed from the mountain, as the scripture says, and the mountain is symbolic of something or someone, just like all the other images are symbolic of something or someone. So we have to remember that this image here, this rock, is symbolic of a part of the mountain because that's where it came from. So we encourage everyone to get a hold of the interpretation of Daniel 2, and you'll be very enlightened. This is another chart of the world's history and prophetic symbols. This chart goes over about the certain beasts that were down through time, as well as the universal systems. Very enlightful chart. Here's some examples of the tracks. On the left, we have track 1, which is the very first track that came out. And that one dealt with Ezekiel's prophecy mostly. Very, very informative. The second one is the one that dealt with the controversy, particularly the trouble that the message had in the early days with the leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There was a so-called investigation of the message back in the early 30s, and this deals with the scenario and what happened on the actual meeting of the Shepherd's Lot of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist leaders with the Seventh-day Adventist leaders. Very informative of the history of those early days. In the right is the track about the world yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and it gives some great prophetic insights. Here's some examples of some miscellaneous tracks. On the left, we'll see the entering wedge, which is about diet and health. And then we have the middle one, which is the White House recruiter. And I believe this was the last track that the message brought us. And this as well has some great prophetic insights. And the right track is the 1950 General Conference Special. This one is particularly valuable because it explains what the purpose of Elijah was and the general meaning of the Lord's prophecy in Malachi 4:5, where he said, I will send you Elijah before the great and dreadful day. So this goes into the purpose of why it was that Lord was to send Elijah. What was the reason? Why didn't he send Noah? Why didn't he send any of the other ancient prophets in the last days? Why did he pick Elijah? So that's a very, very good book. What does the rod teach? We're going to go over a few major points that the rod teaches. Number one, there will be an upcoming church judgment before the final loud cry proclamation to all the world. And many Seventh-day Adventists, as well as Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, are well familiar with what the Spirit of Prophecy wrote in Volume 1, Manuscript Releases, page 260, where, as you can see here, she says, study the 9th chapter of Ezekiel. These words will be literally fulfilled. Okay? So this is a very, very powerful basis for why we believe that the church judgment is in fact going to happen to the church. And if you'll study the message, you'll see that the purpose of this is not to clean out the church right during the time of the plagues, which makes no sense. It's to clean out the church prior to the loud cry message, to have a pure church to give to the world. The Lord wants to, just like in the time of Joshua, he wants his people to be pure so they can take over the kingdom. And Joshua and his people, after the elimination of all those that would not come aboard the Lord's guidance, the Lord's leading, he eliminated. And only Joshua and Caleb were the only two adults over 20 that came out of Egypt that ended up getting into the kingdom. And so too, in the last days, the Lord's going to do the same thing. He's going to clean out his church and get rid of the tares. It's a very sad, solemn situation. And he's got to do it before he can pour out his spirit upon the servants of the Lord to give the final loud cry message. Number two, there is to be a gigantic war in the Middle East. And two of the scriptures you can find is Zechariah 14, 1-3, and Zephaniah 2, 1-5. You can read those at your leisure. But those are very clear prophetic promises that the Lord is to have his land back to his people. You will read there at the bottom, the purpose of the war is to clear out the land for the return of his people. First, the 144,000, and that can be found in Revelation 14, 1-5. Then the great multitude, Revelation 7, 9. The 144,000 shall set up the loud cry headquarters based from Jerusalem. Very important to know what our end time events will happen. Number three, the final loud cry gospel message shall come from Jerusalem. Here we can see from the Lord that he sent his Isaiah prophet to show the following. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. There are some current controversies with the rod, and these controversies have existed from the very beginning when the Lord sent his rod message to the church. We will just go over a few of them. They are accused of calling the Seventh-day Adventist Church Babylon and telling members to come out of her. Truth. They do not lead, imply, or teach Seventh-day Adventist members to leave the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Davidian Seventh-day Adventists do not have their own church and are members of the mother Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we have two quotes from the message. The first one is from the Shepherd's Rod. It's Symbolic Code, Volume 1, number 14, page 9. It matters not what they may do to us. We would rather die than disobey the commandment of the Lord. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is not Babylon. If it were, we would have been duty bound to come out. But since it is not, we have no place to go. Consequently, we shall stay in Jerusalem, though it may be filled with thieves. This is straight from the message to show you that that is a false rumor, a false so-called teaching that comes from the Seventh-day Adventist leaders, saying that the rod believers teach that we should go to the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist quote church and come out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That is utterly false. And then, of course, we have the Review and Herald, which backs up the same thought. There is but one church in the world who are at the present time standing in the breach and making up the hedge, building up the old waste places. For any man to call the attention of the world and other churches to this church, denouncing her as Babylon, is to do a work in harmony with him who is an accuser of the brethren. Review and Herald, September 5, 1893. Another controversy. The Davidian Seventh-day Adventists are the same as the Branch Davidians. The truth is, they are not. The branch movement was started from a man named Benjamin Roden. He infiltrated the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist movement after Victor Houteff died and began to declare himself Elijah who would not die. He died in 1978. The Branch Davidians believe in the following. Number one, feast keeping as a Christian necessity. Number two, the Holy Spirit is a female being. Number three, judgment of the living began in 1955. Number four, Elijah prophesied to come before the great and dreadful day of the Lord is not the only prophet to come. Victor Houteff was followed by, quote, prophet Ben Roden. The Davidian Seventh-day Adventists are often mistakenly connected with David Koresh and the terrible Waco disaster. Many other differences in beliefs and practices exist between the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist and the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist. We want to keep that in mind because the leaders so often, and we can see this on YouTube videos, we can see it from the reports everywhere. They always mix and match Branch Davidians with Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, not knowing the truth of the matter. The truth is that Ben Roden was an infiltrator. He came into the message towards the end of Brother Houteff's life and was there a few times to collect information that he could use later. And he took many parts of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist message and blended it with his own ideas to form a new movement called the Branch. And you can see those references, a Davidian Testimony by Don Adair, a very good book on the history. And you can also watch one of our original videos. Original Davidians are not Branch Davidians. And another controversy is that the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist will someday rise up and commit the Ezekiel 9 church judgment. And see, this is one of Satan's most outlandish rumors and falsehoods that is spread from the leaders of the SDA Church to the people. We can't tell you how many times we've heard this satanic trick being said amongst about the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist. And so what better way to know the truth of the matter than to read the actual message and what it says? And that can be found in Symbolic Code, Volume 3, number 11 and 12, page 2. It will be seen by the following paragraphs that the enemy of truth is determined that light shall not reach the people. Testimonies of Ministers, page 411. Also, that he is doing everything to tear down Mount Carmel Center and the work she is carrying on. Number one, I have been told, says one, that Mount Carmel Center is being built as a sort of fort where weapons are being stored for the purpose of slaying all these Seventh-day Adventists who do not accept the message of the rod. Is this true? Then Victor Houteff answered, nothing could be quite so absurd as a story which the questioner has told. And we admonish our brethren not to believe what they are told by Mount Carmel's enemies, any more than while they were investigating the Sabbath truth, they believed the wild stories about Adventists. Symbolic Code, Volume 3, numbers 11 and 12, page 2. And then we have the second quote, and it says, question, will all but the 144,000 of the present Seventh-day Adventist denomination actually be slain in the separation? Answer, all but those who do not receive the mark or seal, old or young, male or female, will fall under the slaughter of the weapons of the angels, Ezekiel 9:6. Only those who sigh and cry for all the abominations in the midst thereof will receive the mark. Verse 4. John saw 144,000 sealed, marked. If others from within the Seventh-day Adventist denomination besides 144,000 should escape, it is not known to us. And that can be found in Symbolic Code number 15, page 9. So we want to present this video tonight with a warning to Seventh-day Adventists. The Lord promises a male prophet, Malachi 4:5, to come to his church before the great and dreadful day. He is not slack on his promises. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and I shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. Isaiah 55:11. The Lord has a message for his people. Micah 6:9. Will you hear it? Will you take pains to see if these things are so? Acts 17:11. The Lord is to suddenly come to his temple. Malachi 3:1. Let us come before the Lord in humility and openness to know his truth as Bereans. And lastly, we'd like to give two addresses and phone numbers to the two main Davidian Seventh-day Adventist associations. The first one is located in New York, and that is called Mount Carmel Center, with the address and the phone number and the website. And then the second one is the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and this, of course, is the main headquarters in Waco, Texas. Feel free to call or write them, and they will send you out free literature on the message, and you will be very blessed. We came into this message close to 10 years ago, and we love it just as much as we first came into it back then. And you will too also, if you'll only prayerfully and humbly look at the message and read what the Lord has sent. When he promised us, and he in fact cried out to us, hear ye the rod. It is for a purpose. He's not throwing that out there for a trinket, for nothing. So please, let us listen to his rod, and we will be so blessed, and we will be sealed for the upcoming time of trouble. Thank you for listening.